Today we have Christina McBurney and Leanna Bedell from STEMCELL Technologies with us, who will be sharing their experience with social media as a tool for science communication. Christina, Leanna, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us, and thank you to everyone who is listening in today. We're thrilled to be here and very excited to talk to you all about how you, as scientists, can use social media to advance your career. So before we jump into things, I wanted to introduce myself. So my name is Christina McBurney, and I am the Manager of Scientific Communications at STEMCELL Technologies. And what I do is I manage a couple of our science communication programs. So namely, Science in the City, which is a series of websites that summarize life science news in particular cities, such as Vancouver, Seattle, and Boston, as well as our podcast, the STEMCELL podcast, which is published bi-monthly and features researchers in the stem cell field.
And my name is Leanna Bedell. I'm the social media specialist at STEMCELL. I run the corporate social media accounts, focusing not only on communicating science to scientists, but also on things like brand awareness and our PR events. I also work with the rest of our team and really the entire company to integrate and optimize our social media feeds.
All right, so you might be asking what STEMCELL Technologies, a biotechnology company, is doing hosting a webinar on science communication and social media. And the answer is that STEMCELL Technologies actually has the largest science communication department of any life science company in Canada. And a large part of what we do is provide a number of communication services specifically for scientists. So these, of course, include Science in the City and the STEMCELL podcast, which I already talked about. But we also have our scientific newsletters, which you can see here, which are 20 weekly newsletters that summarize the top research and news in various fields of stem cell biology and immunology research. So what makes us experts in social media is that each of these services has their own social media channels. And in combination with our corporate channels, this means that at STEMCELL Technologies, we manage 37 social media channels, which have a total of almost 140,000 total followers. Now, the other day, I also did a little bit of math, and I discovered that every single week, our department publishes almost 400 social media posts. So suffice to say, at STEMCELL Technologies, we definitely know something about social media for scientists. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of things today, I wanted to take a moment to talk about exactly what it is that we're going to be discussing. So we're going to start by talking about science communication and some of the traditional channels by which researchers disseminate their research. And we're going to be talking about some of the limitations of these channels and how we can perhaps improve them. We're then going to be talking about social media and specifically focusing in on the 5 most popular channels in Western culture and who their audience is. Then lastly, we're going to be focusing in on Twitter and trying to convince you that this is really the platform that as a scientist you want to be on. So we're going to do a Twitter walkthrough where we're going to show you how to use the platform. Those of you who are already familiar with Twitter may have seen some of this before. However, we did want to include it for those of you who are new to the platform. And then lastly, and I think most excitingly, we're going to be talking about how to use Twitter as a scientist to do things like stay on top of the literature, expand the reach of your own research, and even increase your chances for funding. So let's just jump right into it. So as I mentioned, there are a number of traditional channels of science communication that scientists use to share their research. For example, one of your main goals as a scientist is, of course, to share your research in scientific journals. Now, you may also attend international conferences or departmental meetings where you present your research in the form of a poster or in a talk. And these are all great ways to share your research, but they do have limitations. Namely, they have limited accessibility and limited opportunity for dialogue. So, for example, with posters and talks, they're fantastic, but of course they're limited to the people that are fortunate enough to attend these conferences. Now, journals, of course, are more broadly accessible. However, they really are limited in terms of discussion. And so this begs the question, are there any additional channels of communication that could be used to reach a larger audience and support increased discussion? And of course, we're here today to suggest that social media may be this other channel. And one of the main reasons for this is that social media really is the most accessible channel of communication worldwide. So here's a bar chart showing the number of active social media users worldwide from 2010 to 2017 and then projected to 2021. And what you can see is that by 2021, social media users worldwide are expected to reach 3.02 billion. So I'm just going to let that sink in. For context, that's 10 times the US population and nearly half the global population. And again, that is just active users, which means it doesn't even include those who have social media profiles but aren't logging into their accounts regularly. So you can see how social media truly is a highly accessible channel of communication. So what are these social media networks? In Western culture, we have what are referred to as the Big Five, or 5 most popular social media platforms. These are Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram, and I'm sure you're familiar with all of them. Now, each of these networks not only have specific functions that differentiate them from one another, but specific audiences that use them, which needs to be taken into consideration when deciding which platform can best serve you as a scientist. But before we get into that, I'd like to post a question to our audience. So of these platforms, which do you think is the most popular worldwide? So the answer is actually Facebook. So this is data taken from January 2019. And it might surprise some people that Facebook is actually the most popular channel because it's pretty well known that Facebook isn't as popular with the younger generation as it once was. But even though that's true, it is still continuing to grow. Now, YouTube is the next channel. This is followed by Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Now, it's worth pointing out that although Twitter and LinkedIn do have far fewer active users than other platforms like Facebook, the number of people using these platforms is still huge. So LinkedIn, for example, as you can still see here, has 350 million users, which is 10 times the population of Canada. So all 5 are great channels for reaching a large audience.
So now that Christina has introduced our presentation, I'm going to touch on the #1 rule for science communication, which is to know your audience. So I'll now take a look at each of the big 5 platforms and their audience demographics so that you know which one you choose to join. Facebook, as we've established, is the most popular platform, so most of you are probably very familiar with it. But why has it been so successful, and what's its purpose? Facebook is used to connect you with family and friends, so you can easily share milestones and personal photos and videos, as well as any life updates. But it's also a great news source. You can find pages like IFL Science posting articles in your newsfeed related to the scientific field. So when we look at the percentage of US adults who say that they use Facebook, they mostly identify as women, and the demographic is largely in their late 20s and early 30s. What's interesting to note here is that the 65-plus group has doubled since 2012. And on the opposite end, when we look at the teen demographic, this group is shrinking drastically. Facebook is having a difficult time filling this funnel. So essentially those that joined Facebook when it was in its peak have simply stuck with it and gotten older. For science communication, Facebook is still popular with well-established pages like IFL Science, but now due to recent events such as the fake news era and data privacy issues, anecdotally it seems that more scientists have moved away from this platform. YouTube is a very different platform from Facebook, but still extremely popular amongst all age groups, especially those in their early teens and 20s. But YouTube is not just for cat videos. As a user, you can stream videos on this platform to connect with communities. For example, makeup artists. You can also follow educational content, such as ASAP Science here, or simply be entertained by various videos and comedy skits. But for science communication, this platform can really be fantastic. You can make 30 long-minute videos that dive into a lot of technical details, or like ASAP Science, you can create really quick 5-minute videos that visually and concisely break down a scientific concept for public consumption. But the downside to this platform is that it requires many resources, so you need a lot of time and video equipment and software programs. You have to come up with original content and have a completely developed story in order to organically grow your audience. So it's typically used by those hoping to supplement a living off of their videos rather than simply a hobby. Instagram is arguably a new form of blog. It's a kind of photojournalism social media platform, almost exclusively on mobile, where you can post aesthetically pleasing content alongside a long-form text post. And you can do this to either a private or public audience. And Instagram is where you hear the term influencers for things like personal branding, and it's a very strong platform for businesses in general. They can creatively post content that relates to their products. Similarly to Facebook, it attracts mostly women and can be used to connect with family and friends. But unlike Facebook, it tends to attract a younger demographic. More recently, this platform is being used for educational purposes, which is where science communication comes in. Instagram is the newest platform that scientists are flocking to for SciComm. Arguably the first SciComm influencer on this platform was Science Sam, seen in this example. Samantha Yamin, or Science Sam, is a PhD student from the University of Toronto. She finds a way to creatively discuss stem cell research, taking great photos and videos in her lab to support further in her text, and starts trends like Scientists Who Selfie to promote the personification of scientists and to educate the general public. Similar to YouTube, but not quite as extreme, this platform does require resources, so you need to still create original content, otherwise you won't seem very authentic and you won't be able to grow a following. Unlike YouTube, you are more limited, so you can only have shorter video and text length, and therefore this platform is better for community building and less for the technical content. LinkedIn is in a field of its own. It focuses on the business community, so it's a place where professionals can create and maintain career-oriented business connections and promote their services or professional skills. So it started in 2002 as a fancy place to copy and paste your CV and then apply for jobs. But it's now the fastest growing platform for working, educated professionals. So about 50% of degree holders use LinkedIn, and 44% of users earn more than $75,000 a year. So if you're on this platform, you're targeting a very specific demographic, and it's definitely different from the other social media platforms. This audience is split pretty evenly between men and women, and the age group is mostly in the mid-30s, which makes sense when you're talking about business professionals. A common post seen is this one, or similar to this one from STEMCELL, which is talking about a recent award from Deloitte for being named one of Canada's best managed companies for 2019. Over the past few years, LinkedIn has begun to focus more on their news feed. So it functions similarly to Facebook's news feed, where you can follow public content posted by companies, but you can also follow private content posted by individuals you've connected with. So compared to Facebook, news articles featured on LinkedIn have a heavy focus on business, industry, and tech, but LinkedIn still has fantastic features for scientists. Not only can you easily post visual media or various links, but you can also include hashtags to make your content more searchable, which I'll touch on later, and also you can upload documents such as scientific journals. It's STEMCELL's fastest growing network as well. So for example, you will often see posts like this one from Science in the City, talking about a recent paper published in Nature Communications. Twitter, which Christina has been alluding to, is what we're going to try to sell you as a great place to start as a science communicator. So it is a live, fast-paced newsfeed where you can keep up with friends, breaking news, or build professional communities. For example, news outlets are often posting breaking news first on Twitter before even writing an article. This live and immediate nature of Twitter, plus the chronological order of the timeline, which I'll show you later, results in more dialogue between users and perhaps less filtering compared to other social networks. You can post articles, videos, and text up to 280 characters, which is called a tweet. And these features require scientists to concisely and creatively explain research concepts. For example, chromatin haiku takes recent chromatin papers and breaks them down into haiku form. So talk about a creative way to use not only your character limits, but also a great way to engage your audience on Twitter. So Twitter is enormously popular for scientists, but why is this the case? Twitter is used within the scientific community for a few main reasons, including the ability to post multimedia posts such as links, photos, and videos, the tweets, which I talked about before, and as well, it allows anyone to view and participate in discussions. So all of these aspects together are a really strong force for Twitter against the other platforms. In this Nature paper cited down here, they asked scientists why they use various social media platforms to communicate science. So the highlighted circles here are the most popular reasons why scientists chose Twitter rather than any of the other social media platforms. And so some of the top reasons include discover peers, discover recommended papers, as well as follow discussions. So this really exemplifies how Twitter is all about that community, accessibility, and engagement. And now I'm going to jump into the platform to do a demo of how Twitter works and how to compose a basic tweet. So this is the homepage, and this is your news feed, similar to Facebook and LinkedIn. However, each of these posts are tweets from those that you follow or retweets from their own content. And it's generally ordered from newest here and then scroll down in oldest, so it's in chronological order. If I go over to our profile here, similar to our news feed, you can see all of our posts, our tweets, and all of our retweets from newest to oldest. Up top, you can see a few stats such as followers and who we're following, a little bit of bio, and some photos and videos. Now if I go here, I can compose a tweet. So this is going to be where our 280 characters come in. So I can say something like, great press release discussing a groundbreaking Nature Neuro paper from Mini Brain Lab at MRC LMB on cerebral organoids. A couple of things worth noting here. So we have 3 Twitter tags. That includes the Nature Neuroscience paper tag, the Mini Brain Lab, so this is Madeline Lancaster, an author of this paper, and then the institution that she's associated with. So each of these tags means that the accounts will receive a notification that they've been mentioned in this tweet, and this is really important because hopefully they'll see this tweet, they'll think it's really awesome and great, and they will like and share it with their audience. So now when you are making a tweet and you are tagging people, this just increases what we call the reach of your tweet. So more people are now seeing your post. As well, we also have hashtag organoids here. So I'll touch on hashtags a little bit later as well, but this is really a way to group material together, and now people that are searching this hashtag on Twitter can really easily see your tweet, and like as if you were tagging someone, this also increases the reach of your post. As well, I've included a link here, but you can also upload photos or videos, GIFs, Twitter polls, add your location, and emojis up here. And if you're finding that the 280 characters is really limiting and you want to tell more, you can press this plus sign here, and that drops down to another tweet. So you have another 280 characters to dive into more detail. And all of the subsequent tweets will link back to the original tweet, and you can create what's called a Twitter thread. So if someone, say, finds the 3rd tweet down in your Twitter thread, they can still refer back to the original post and get the full story. So I can go ahead and post this tweet, and then it will show up on the feed here. Now, if this was someone else's tweet and we wanted to engage with the content, we can go ahead and reply to it with our own tweet. We can retweet, so we can simply retweet, or we can even add our own comment up here, which would be visible to our audience. We can like the post. If we go back to our home feed, a few more things to note here. We have some suggestions from Twitter of who to follow, and we have some trending hashtags here. So these are really big events that a lot of people on Twitter are talking about. So probably not super relevant to science communication, but you can geographically target these hashtags if you, say, for example, live in Vancouver and want to know some local news. You have moments, which I won't touch on, but I will go to notifications. And this is where you can see how well your posts are doing, who is liking and retweeting the content. And you can also find when people tag you, as I did in my own tweet. You can also go to messages, which is where you can privately message someone or someone can message you. And one last thing I wanted to note, because I will be going over it later, is if you go to this drop-down menu and you go to Twitter Analytics, you can take a peek at how your posts are doing as well. Now I'll go over hashtags, which we had included in that tweet that I just posted. But hashtags are mostly used to allow users to easily find posts in a particular grouping or a content theme. Hashtags are a great way to grow your community, as I mentioned before, and to connect with others on this platform. So some common science hashtags that you can include are things like Science Twitter, PhD Life, SciComm, or SciArt, which is a personal favorite of mine. And in this example here from STEMCELL, we have the hashtag immunotherapy. So immediately when I see this tweet, it visually attracts my eye, and I generally know what the post is going to be about. But this hashtag as well, if other scientists are looking it up on Twitter, they will now be able to see this tweet and hopefully engage with the content. Hashtags as well are great when you are attending various conferences or events. For example, in this post here, when STEMCELL was at ISSCR in 2018. So when you're posting on Twitter using the conference hashtag, you can sort of live tweet the experience so that those that couldn't attend the conference or are in a different panel and wanted to keep up with the panel you are currently at can now keep up live time on the feed. And this is really part of a larger component of the science communication aspect of Twitter, which is all about accessibility. As I mentioned before in the previous tweet, tagging is really important when you want to increase the reach. So when you tag an account, they will receive a notification and hopefully engage with that post. Some common examples of tags that you might want to include on Twitter are institutions such as UBC, researchers such as Peter Zanstra, funding agencies like Genome BC, journals such as Nature, or if you're into sci policy, you can tag policymakers such as Kirsty Duncan. So if we look at this post here from Science in the City, we can see that they've tagged Nature Communications because they're talking about a paper. And they also tagged the institutions that these scientists are associated with. So now all of these accounts are going to receive a notification. Hopefully they think the content is great and they will like or share with their audience. While you can post directly and live on Twitter, there are other platforms that allow you to schedule posts in advance. So if you're finding that you only have 5 or 10 minutes in a day and you don't want to spam your followers with a lot of content, you can use some free services such as TweetDeck and Hootsuite, which I won't go into details, but you can look up these platforms for yourself. So you've been tweeting for a few months now, and how do you know that your posts are doing well? And how do you know that what you're posting is really resonating with your audience? You can look at Twitter Analytics, which I showed you really briefly in that drop-down menu on Twitter. You can look at both quantitative and qualitative metrics. Some quantitative metrics include impressions, which is the number of times a tweet was seen by a user, engagement, which is the total number of times a user interacted with a tweet. So this is a click anywhere on the tweet, including any links or hashtags, as well as liking or retweeting the post. And finally, you have engagement rate, which is the total number of engagements over the total number of impressions. So we're all scientists here, and we know how important quantitative metrics are. We know how important looking at those numbers are. But on social media, it's also really important to look at qualitative metrics because sometimes accounts can inflate their following. They can have various bot followers, or they can even pay for followers. So we need to look at the qualitative metrics to really have an understanding for how our audience feels about the content. One example of a qualitative metric as defined by Hootsuite is a meaningful relationship moment. So this is a social media interaction with another user that results in an observable positive change in sentiment or behavior. So this is a bit of a mouthful and it's a pretty big ask. So I'm going to break this down in the example seen on the side here to really have a solid understanding of what a meaningful relationship moment is. So this is Dr. Jeffrey Millman, who's a stem cell biologist in the United States. And last summer, he posted this tweet, which is talking about a purchase of some stem cell product, as well as tagging and including some photos. After this post, one of his colleagues in the UK gave a little nudge in STEMCELL's direction saying, hope STEMCELL threw in a free beta cell stuffy with that large order. And he also replies saying that would be amazing. We're definitely missing a good mascot. So of course we sent him the beta cell stuffy as seen in the photos here. So since this time, Millman has continued to post photos of the beta cell stuffy, various aspects of his lab and lab experiments, and he's continued to tag STEMCELL to build that relationship on Twitter and to increase engagement of his own tweets. So not only does Millman post about the stuffy in relation to STEMCELL, but also to the success of his lab. So anytime a new paper is published or he's being funded by a new grant. So because of this relationship that he's built with STEMCELL, we can share in his successes. So we retweet his papers and other content. And this means that now his content that would perhaps only reach his direct followers, so a few hundred followers, are now reaching almost 20,000 followers. So regardless of if you're engaging with a company or with other researchers, building those relationships is really key for Twitter. And this is really how you get your message broadcasted on this platform. After building this relationship with STEMCELL on Twitter, STEMCELL invited Millman to join Dalen on the STEMCELL podcast. So this means that Millman is reaching another audience. There's another whole group of scientists that are listening to the podcast, and Millman can use this platform to talk about any successes and failures in this lab, what kind of research he's doing right now, what his hopes are for the future of his research, and perhaps even someone that's interested and listening to what's going on in his lab might want to collaborate and reach out to him in the future. What started as being one Twitter interaction has now moved off Twitter and into the real world. And for being on the podcast, Millman received another gift. But on a more serious note, if we look at this world map, each Twitter logo represents one or more scientists that engaged with the Millman stem cell content. So you can see a lot of them are focused in North America, which makes sense since he is from the United States, but there's also reach over in Europe and as well Japan and Australia. So while we can't say with certainty, we can make some assumptions and guess that without Twitter, without this way to broadcast his message, perhaps some of these scientists may never have known about Dr. Millman or about his research. As well, the great part about Twitter is that this relationship will feed back. So Millman himself will also share content from these scientists in Japan and Australia and continue to build that community aspect on Twitter.
All right, so now we're going to get into what I think is the really interesting part, how to use Twitter to further your science. So one of the top reasons for using Twitter as a scientist is that it is a fantastic way to stay on top of the literature. And the reason for this is that by following the right people, you can effectively turn your homepage into a news feed for newly published papers. So what do I mean by the right people? Well, first of all, I suggest that you follow your favorite researchers. So these could be collaborators, they could just be other researchers who are doing cool research that you're interested in. So the great thing about scientists is that they're excited about their papers that they publish, and they often tweet about it, as you can see an example right here. Now, you may be asking yourself, okay, but how is this any different from using PubMed alerts? Why use Twitter instead? And the answer is that scientists also like to tweet when they have preprints. So these are going to be articles that are not yet published in scientific papers, and they are not found on PubMed. Therefore, you can't use PubMed alerts to find them. And I would argue that Twitter is actually one of the best ways to stay on top of preprints. So in addition to following your own favorite researchers, you can also follow your favorite journals, because of course journals are going to be promoting the research that they're publishing. And lastly, if you're interested in science on a more regional level, you can also follow your favorite institute. So for example, here's a tweet from the Cambridge Stem Cell Institute. Now, in addition to staying on top of the literature, Twitter is also a great way to expand the reach of your own research. So what I've done here is I've included a tweet by Peter Zanstra at the University of British Columbia. And you can see in this tweet that he's basically promoting 2 new preprints that he has coming out of his lab. Now, if you look down at the bottom, you can see that within a few hours, which is when this screenshot was taken, he already had 7 retweets and 43 likes. Now, unfortunately, we do not have access to Peter's Twitter analytics, but what we can do is we can pull a similar tweet that we posted on Science in the City. So this is another paper from UBC Chemistry, and you can see that it received about 10 retweets, so a few more than Peter's, and about 19 likes, so about half the number. And when we pull up the metrics from Twitter Analytics, we can see that this tweet received 9,222 impressions. So if you remember from what Leanna was saying, this means that over 9,000 people viewed this tweet. It had 207 engagements, which if you remember means clicks on the tweet. So this of course includes these retweets and these likes, but the majority of these engagements are actually going to be clicks on the text up here and most likely on the link leading to the actual paper. So this leads to an engagement rate of 2.2%, which is considerably higher than the average Twitter engagement rate across the board, which is 0.046%. So basically, a single tweet reached 9,000 people and had almost 200 people click on it. And for Peter's tweet, it was probably even higher than this, since he actually had 43 people who liked it. So once again, just a really, really easy way for you as a scientist to take 30 seconds, talk about your work, and have a bunch of people all over the world who may never have seen this work see it right in their newsfeed. So this leads to the question, who is viewing my tweets? Are these 9,000 people members of the general public? Are they other scientists? Depending on your purpose of your tweet, you may want to be reaching one audience versus the other. So fortunately, there is actually a group that has looked at this. So this is data from Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, BC. And what these researchers did was they found a group of 110 academic scientists on Twitter, and they looked at their followers. And they grouped these followers into scientists, members of the general public, media, and some other groups. And what they found is that for those academic scientists that had under 500 followers, over half of them, or 65%, were actually other scientists as well. About 23% were the general public, and the others made up other groups. What was interesting, though, was that as their followers increased up to about 2,500, they found that the number of scientists actually decreased, bottoming out at about 46%, which is still pretty close to a 50-50 split between scientists and the general public. And so really, the take-home message here is that whether you're trying to target members of the general public with your message, whether you're trying to target other scientists, Twitter is a great platform for this. And maybe because there are so many scientists on Twitter, it's been shown that Twitter is a significant predictor of publication downloads and citations. So what we're looking at here is data from researchers at Indiana University. And so these are log scatter plots of tweets mentioning scientific papers versus downloads of those papers, tweets mentioning scientific papers versus citations of those papers, or downloads of a paper versus citations. As you can see, downloads and citations actually correlated more strongly with these Twitter mentions than they did with each other. So this is pretty interesting, and it suggests that taking the time again to just publish a single tweet doesn't hurt. So if you need some more convincing, a recent study from the University of British Columbia found that Twitter mentions had a stronger influence on citation rate than other social media platforms, such as Facebook, and surprisingly, more than mentions by traditional news outlets. So again, doing something as easy as sending out a tweet about your research really couldn't hurt. We've mostly been talking about sharing your own research, but Twitter is also a great platform for supporting your peers and sharing their research. So this includes tweets congratulating others on great papers or linking to videos of recent talks they've attended. It's also a great way to congratulate your peers on awards or funding. So moving away from self or peer promotion, Twitter is increasingly being used by scientists to network. I personally know two researchers, one who is a postdoc and one who is a professor, both who first heard about the jobs they now hold through tweets, such as this one, then through other more traditional channels. Some researchers are also turning to Twitter to find collaborators, so it's not unusual to come across tweets, such as some of these ones here, where a researcher is looking for someone in a specific area to collaborate with. This especially happens at conferences because you can use the hashtag and you can wind up moving that conversation offline after you've sort of connected with the person first on Twitter. Twitter is also a great resource for troubleshooting experiments. So it kind of works similarly to ResearchGate in that way, but Twitter has a few advantages that cause it to produce more answers in a shorter amount of time. The first is, of course, that short, concise nature of the tweets, which allow researchers to quickly understand the problem rather than having to wade through those long paragraph questions that are often written on ResearchGate. The second is the ability for the tweet to reach the homepage of so many people versus ResearchGate, where researchers need to be actively looking for questions to answer. So all of this makes Twitter a fantastic platform to troubleshoot with your peers. Now, the answers you receive often come in the form of other researchers, like you can see here, who've done similar experiments, but also through biotechnology companies like STEMCELL that specialize in certain fields. So in the middle here, we have an example of a tweet that Leanna actually came across, where a researcher was asking for tips on freezing primary leukemia samples to keep them viable. So Leanna knew that we had the knowledge in our company to help out this researcher, so she immediately reached out to our scientists and was able to quickly respond with a suggestion. So this actually highlights another great thing about Twitter, which is that you're able to interact not just with other researchers, but with life science companies as well, who you're typically not going to come across on ResearchGate. Now, this has already been touched on lightly by Leanna, but Twitter is a great way to follow along with conferences that you are unable to attend. So the reason for this is that scientists are increasingly using Twitter to live tweet sessions. So this is an example here. STEMCELL actually recently attended the AAAS conference in Washington, D.C., and we put on a panel about bridging the gap between industry and academia, which was live tweeted by Leanna. So what this means is that every time a new panelist spoke, she tweeted a photo about them, and she included a little introduction to them as well. She then highlighted some of the main points that they were discussing, and she included additional resources such as videos providing more information, as well as figures that really drove home the point. And then in the end, she actually tweeted every single question that was asked by the audience, and even the responses from the panelists. And she tied these all together using the hashtag for the conference, and she of course included each one of these tweets in a thread so that they were very easy to find. And so I unfortunately was unable to attend this conference. I was back in the office at home, but I pulled up Twitter during this panel and was following along, and I truly felt like I was actually attending the conference and that I didn't miss out on anything. So again, this is really a great way to make a conference accessible to everyone globally. Now, because of this, some conferences are actually starting to move entirely over to Twitter. So a Twitter conference is a virtual conference that takes place exclusively on Twitter using a hashtag. So there are a few of these around, but one of the biggest ones in the scientific arena is the Brain Twitter conference, which uses the hashtag BrainTC, as you can see over here on the left. Now, these conferences work very much like a regular meeting. So you can see from this introductory tweet in the middle here, that for this conference, it included 4 keynote speakers and 61 regular presenters whose talks were scheduled over a 19-hour period. So I've linked to an example of what one of these presentations looks like over here. So I'm just going to open it up so you can see it fully. So typically, the conference organizers start a Twitter thread with an introduction of the speaker as well as the name of the talk, as you can see up here. The presenter will then come in, and for this particular conference, is allowed to discuss the research in a maximum of 6 tweets. Now, this might not sound like much considering that tweets are limited to 280 characters, but keep in mind that each tweet can link to additional information. For example, this particular presenter actually only posted 2 tweets for her talk, but one linked out to a video which contained more information, as you can see here, and the other included a detailed figure. Now, following the completion of the tweets, audience members or members of the general public on Twitter were able to ask questions through the comments which the presenter responded to. So these Twitter conferences very much function like regular conferences, but again, they're far more accessible than the traditional format, and I think we're going to be seeing far more of these in the future. So one of the last uses of Twitter for scientists that we want to discuss with you today is the ability to leverage your social media use to increase your chances of funding. Now, many people are surprised to hear that funding agencies would care about something like social media, but science communication, especially to the general public, is something that they're recognizing is extremely important. So I've included here a handful of quotes from various funding agencies about the value that they place on science communication and social media. Now, I'm not going to read all of them to you, but I want to highlight a couple of key points. So in this very first quote, which you can find on the website for the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, Canada's federal funding agency for health research, they discuss how communicating research that is supported by CIHR to the general public can actually increase public support for this type of funding. So it makes sense that they therefore want researchers to be talking and sharing their research as it creates more funding for the future. These 2 other quotes are from the Wellcome Trust in the UK, who recently commissioned a study of how the researchers they fund were sharing their research. And they concluded that public engagement is a relatively novel yet increasingly important concern for UK researchers, and that social media specifically is at the forefront of this type of engagement. So the question is, where does social media fit into a grant application? And the answer is that it obviously depends on the funding agency. So we've included here some common sections where social media use can be mentioned, in addition to some of the agencies that have these sections. In general, these include sections for knowledge translation, knowledge transfer activities, broader impacts, public engagement, contributions to science, or dissemination. So to show you how this is done, I've included an example of an actual grant which was funded. So this was included within the public engagement section of a grant, as you can see up here. And in yellow, I've highlighted the mention of social media use. So it reads, "Finally, blank and blank are avid social media users, and they have created a range of online tools to relay the progress of this project to the academic community and the general public. These include existing lab websites, Twitter accounts, and an Instagram account. Additional resources specific to this collaborative project will be created ad hoc." So I'm not trying to say that including your social media use will get you funded, of course, but in an increasingly competitive landscape, it certainly doesn't hurt to show that you're doing your part in sharing your research in every way that you can. So now that we've hopefully convinced you that as a scientist you should be on Twitter, we also wanted to touch on time management. I've heard a lot of researchers express concern that in order to be an effective user of Twitter, they would have to invest more time than they currently have. Now, fortunately, research shows us that this actually isn't the case. Although the average time spent on other social media platforms is quite high, so you can see 40 minutes on YouTube, 35 minutes on Facebook, 15 minutes on Instagram, the average time spent on Twitter is only 1 minute. And this isn't because people are ineffectively using Twitter. This is really all due to the fact that tweets, by definition, are short and digestible. So you can therefore scan through dozens of tweets in a very short amount of time, as well as like, retweet, or even post your own tweet in only a few seconds, like we saw Leanna do earlier. So if that doesn't convince you, we also have some tips and tricks for time management. So instead of tweeting during your workday, we suggest tweeting during your commute or on your lunch break. If you're interested in not missing out on any tweets from particular researchers or users, you can also actually set up notifications for any time that user tweets so that you don't miss out. If you're concerned about diluting down your feed with non-science posts due to followers you're interested in who are not actually researchers, what you can do is you can also create separate follower lists, so one for scientists, one for your personal acquaintances, so that when you want to see what's happening in the science community, you simply go to that specific feed. Furthermore, you don't need to actually be tweeting yourself and your own content. Twitter can simply be used to monitor things and stay on top of the literature, or you can just retweet other people's content, so it doesn't have to take up much time. So there's really no reason that Twitter should be taking time away from your experiments. So to go back to the very beginning of this presentation, we discussed the traditional channels of science communication that scientists currently use to share their research, and we touched on some of their limitations in terms of accessibility and discussion. So I'm hoping that after today, we've convinced you that social media is another important tool for sharing research, and that Twitter in particular can be used in a number of different ways to advance your research and your career. And just as a reminder, if you have any questions for us, please feel free to reach out after the workshop. You can find us on Twitter at the following handles, or also on Facebook or LinkedIn. So we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, everyone.